Hey guys, good morning, at least from my perspective. In this video, I'm going to talk about what Warren Buffett can teach you about coding. That is a title I'm sure most of you would have never expected. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that I am a big believer in universal principles. These ideas, these principles that seem to, well, not seem to, they actually impact, they're true across many different disciplines of study. So I borrowed a lot of ideas, for example, from my martial arts background, which I did for nearly 3 decades, and I took those ideas and I moved those into coding, and they translated 100%. Of course, when I went into coding, I only had about maybe 15, 16 years of martial arts experience at that point. But nonetheless, those lessons from martial arts translated very well into coding. So for instance, in martial arts, you learn, as you become advanced, you learn that simplicity is what separates the good martial artists from the great martial artists. The great martial artists are able to execute their movements in the most simple and direct manner. And I used to see that in advanced martial artists from different styles, whether it be boxing, or kung fu, or judo, jiu-jitsu, etc., etc., etc. The most advanced people were always very, very, very efficient, very simple, very direct and refined in their technique. Same thing with code. When you're writing code, any experienced developer will tell you that simple code is the best code, and you want very simple, clean structures, and that will make for much better software in the end. That is one of the reasons why we have all these frameworks. These frameworks give you, in a turnkey package, if you will, a bunch of code that is refined, cleaned, and has been vetted by many, many people. That's what you're looking for. So how does this tie into Warren Buffett? Now, one of the principles that Warren Buffett will talk about these days is about diversification. How he says, and if you don't know who Warren Buffett is, he is, I believe he's the second richest man in the world, probably the most successful and consistent investor in the history, well, at least what we know of the world. And a rare person indeed. And he has very specific principles that he goes by. And one of the things he tells people these days is that you should probably, not you should probably, said 99.9% of people should be highly diversified in their stock market picks, as he is. But he takes it a step further. There's something in the stock market called indexed funds. What are index funds? They basically take a slice of a whole bunch of company stocks and they put them into one basket, and you buy that one basket. So you don't have to try and pick all these individual companies. Because, for instance, let's say you wanted to invest, which one should you pick? Apple, IBM, Microsoft, Google? Which one should you buy? You don't know, right? You don't know probably which is going to be the best company to invest. Maybe it's none of these companies. Maybe it's a bank. Maybe it's some oil company. Maybe it's Starbucks stock. Who knows, right? Even the best stock pickers in the world, data shows, and I'm a data-driven guy, data shows that these guys they're terrible. If you bought just an index fund, meaning you just blindly bought a little piece of all these companies, you can buy these things in index funds, are called ETFs. That's another way. That's a way of buying all these type of investments, where you're buying a little piece of many companies. If you just bought ETFs of the index of the stock market, then you're going to outperform, meaning you're going to do much better than these fancy stock pickers who are doing all kinds of research, and they're buying in and out of stocks, trying to pick the big winners. The stories that you hear about the guy who invests in a company or the girl and does really, really well because it goes 20 times, these are like lottery ticket winners. Typically what you hear is that you have a person who's very successful once in the investment world, and I can tell you, I've seen it. And then a couple of years later, they're terrible. They've lost so much money. Because at the end of the day, what the data shows is at the end of the day, the index always outperforms the people who are trying to stock pick. I won't get into all the details because this is not a stock picking video. Anyway, back to Warren Buffett, who talks about most people should just, well, not 99.9% should just buy index funds, meaning you should have maximum diversification in your stock portfolio. This way you can ride the up and down, and after 20 years you're going to be way up, making much more money than people who don't do that strategy. If you're diversified, this is the key concept, and it applies to coding. If you are diversified, your chances of success increase big time. So how does this relate to coding? How does this Buffett rule, it's not just Buffett, Vanguard, another company, and I forget the name of the guy who founded it, Bogo or Baco, I forget his name also, it just popped right out of my head, so it doesn't matter. The Vanguard funds, again, famous, they said don't buy individual stocks, you're wasting your money, you're wasting your time, you're going to lose, rather just buy index funds. Again, you buy a little piece of all these companies, you'll do much better. This is, time and time again, the data shows this to be the case. Don't let people trick you, by the way, if you're getting into the stock market to invest, into thinking that they're going to pick the best stocks for you. That's a bunch of BS. So, when it comes to coding, I have been talking about how, first of all, one thing that's universal, a little bit different from stocks. Regardless of the programming language you learn, Java, PHP, Python, C#, JavaScript, Ruby, Swift, there's opportunity in all these things, and even if you don't find work, let's say you learn Swift, which is the language Apple created for iOS development. Let's say you do that, but you can't find any Swift jobs. Not such a big deal, because once you've learned the basics of programming, it applies to all the modern programming languages. So you can't get any Swift work. Okay, you spend a month or two, you jump into Java, or you jump into PHP, or you jump into whatever, you jump into JavaScript, etc., etc. So it's not a huge deal. So that being said, when you think about diversification, you got to look at the languages in terms of which language diversifies your ability to get a job or to get gigs. Which one is the most flexible? Let's look at a couple of candidates. Let's look at Swift. We talked about Swift, iOS development. Now Swift, great little language, by the way. I like it in of itself. But the problem I have with Swift personally, and the reason I never jumped into it, I played around with it. I went in there, created basic stuff just to tinker around. But I decided to drop it because that's all you can do. If you write Swift, all you can do is write iOS apps. Now, that could be great. A lot of people make a lot of money building iOS apps. But what the market is heading towards, it's heading towards building mobile apps, as I've mentioned in previous videos, with HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. I call that the web stack. Why is the market going in that direction? Because you can build an app with HTML5 based technology, which includes those 3 languages, but you could also, with the same code base, then immediately flip it into an Android app. So you can write one code base, and you can write Android, and you can write iOS. That's huge, right? Because if you write native, meaning you write in Swift for iOS, or you could use Objective-C, but people use Swift these days. You use Swift for iOS, or if you want to go Android, you want to write native Android, you go Java for Android. Then if you need to write the app for the other operating system, you got to write 2 different code bases. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, a lot of maintenance. You got to get new skilled coders in there. It's very expensive. So even the biggest companies in the world now, instead of writing native for most of the apps, can't do it for all of the apps because HTML5 base is not quite as fast as native. But for most apps out there, you don't need the ultra speed. They're writing the stuff in HTML5 technology in the web stack because it's so advantageous. Here's the great thing about learning HTML5 technology. As I said, if you learn just Swift, that's all you can do, iOS. But if you learn HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript, now you can do Android development. Client comes to you, I need to develop a little Android app for my store. No problem, HTML5. Another client says, hey, I want to do iOS. No problem. Most clients are going to want both, ideally. No problem, HTML5. Well, what happens if you can't find any mobile apps to develop? Well, you can do websites. You can do WordPress-based sites. You could do web apps. You can jump into a Node, perhaps, because you know JavaScript now, right? You see, with the HTML5 stack, it gives you a huge platform, meaning it gives you a lot of flexibility. It's like buying an ETF. It is like a Vanguard fund. It gives you that diversification of skills or access to jobs, right? So learning HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, especially in terms of getting work, whether it be freelancer or working for somebody, this is the most flexible set of skills you can get now in software development. By the way, I haven't mentioned it, Windows 10 now supports HTML5 technology for native apps as well. Essentially, you can write native apps in the HTML5 web stack, HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript. I won't say it again. When I say HTML5, I'm talking about those three languages. Anyway, Windows 10 now supports that native as well. And this is not a surprise to me because history teaches us in technology is that easy and open always beats closed. Easy and open always beats closed. Recent example, Flash, closed. Closed technology owned by Adobe. HTML5 kicked its butt. Why? Because HTML5 is open, it's free. There are other reasons as well. Flash was a security issue, and Steve Jobs didn't like Adobe, so he decided to kill Flash on iOS when iOS had a huge amount of power because the iPhone was so dominant at the time. And yeah, so Flash, again, got killed by HTML5 technology because it is open. Another example, Mac OS versus Windows. Now, neither is free. You can't get Mac OS unless you buy an Apple. Windows, you have to pay for it, but it's not exactly expensive. But here's the thing. Why did Windows beat Apple in terms of market penetration, in terms of desktop computers? There's several factors, but one of the big factors is that Microsoft made it really easy for developers to develop on Windows. Made it very easy. And then it spread like wildfire. So the point of this video is that you want to consider technologies that give you maximum flexibility in terms of the type of work that you're going to be able to access and the type of jobs or the variety of jobs you can access. Again, this is not a discussion of the technical merits of the HTML5 stack versus Swift or native Java. This is not at all that. This is about the business end of it all and the practicality of it all. Because you got to remember, you can't be one of these nerds who just looks purely at the code and the technology and judges from that perspective. You have to consider the business implications, the job implications, the flexibility that these languages provide, the environment around them. I remember back in the 90s, a friend of mine who was a big Delphi programmer, and he loved Delphi. And Delphi used to compete with Visual Basic. And they did pretty much the same thing. But Visual Basic smashed Delphi because it was Visual Basic, Microsoft's product, so they're able to push it through, blah, 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 blah. My Delphi buddy was saying to me, yeah, but Delphi is so much better. Oh, it's so much better. Why are we doing Visual Basic? And he was just so in love with Delphi. And technically, yeah, it had some superior aspects to it versus Visual Basic. No kidding. But there's just so much more work. There's so much more opportunity developing apps in Visual Basic. And so Visual Basic dominated for that space. Delphi lost. So you ask yourself, how many opportunities are there in the HTML5 stack versus Swift and just doing iOS? You have to consider that. All right. I hope that was useful.